Which event from history will always be funny? Event 1. Ancient Korea had special recording officials, whose job was to record everything. They were considered separate from the government, so the emperor of the time wasn't allowed to give them orders or tell them not to record something. Of course, some emperors would try anyway. On one occasion, King Taejong, 15th century, fell off his horse while hunting. The recorder nearby wrote it down. The emperor insisted that it be removed from the record, and even tried to have the report destroyed. This led to some nonsense, as the emperor kept destroying their work, but the recorders kept copying it and hiding it in increasingly obscure places, and of course, recorded the whole thing as it happened. A few hundred years later, and the only thing that emperor is famous for is trying to hide the fact he fell off his horse. Event 2. The Spanish chicken farmer Juan Pujol Garcia tried to become a spy for the MI5, but they rejected him. He then applied to become a spy for the Nazi Schutzstaffel, who accepted him. The Schutzstaffel gave him the order to start a spy network in London, but instead he set up shop in Lisbon. There he started feeding the Nazi commanders a bunch of BS intel, based on publicly available newspapers and magazines. They were believable enough for the Nazis to accept it as truth, even though they were completely made up. Every once in a while, he would be confronted about bad intel. He blamed it on one of his fictional subordinates, and told his commanders he had rectified the problem. In one situation, he told the Nazis that his subordinate had fallen ill and later died. A fake obituary was placed in the newspapers to back his story up. He even convinced the Nazis to pay a pension to the, again, fictional agent's widow. The MI5 became aware of his existence after they saw the Kriegsmarine waste considerable effort in hunting down a non-existing convoy based on Garcia's, again fake, intel. They enrolled him into their ranks, and that's when his BS started getting serious. He was given the nickname Garbo, in reference to the best actor in the world, Greta Garbo. Because the Nazis believed he was one of theirs, they even sent him an enigma to encode the messages he was sending them. It was promptly turned over to the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. His most important work was on Operation Fortitude. He helped convince Nazi high command that the invasion of Normandy was a diversion. Officers believed a larger army was due to land in Calais. For his efforts, he was awarded the Iron Cross, authorized by Hitler himself. Understandably, the medal was awarded via radio. He was then also given an MBE medal by the British King, making him one of the few people who received medals from both sides. He faked his death and fled to Venezuela after the war, where he then ran a bookshop. His secret identity was undiscovered until a journalist got interested in the story and managed to track him down in 1984. He managed to finagle the real name from a former spy, and then found Garcia after literally calling every J. Garcia in the Barcelona phone book until he managed to get in contact with Garcia's nephew. Event 3. The 1904 Olympics Marathon in St. Louis. It reads as a mockumentary. The winner was later disqualified when it was discovered he ended up getting a ride from someone. Only 14 of the participants actually finished, as the road they ran on was dusty and dust was causing many of them to not be able to breathe. One of the finishers took a nap. The eventual winner drank a concoction of strychnine, raw egg, and brandy. The designer of the course decided to test a theory he called purposeful dehydration, so the course lacked water for the participants. The Cuban representative showed up in a long-sleeved shirt and pants. Someone assisted him in cutting his pants into shorts. He raised money to make it to St. Louis, but when he reached New Orleans, he gambled it all away and had to hitchhike the rest of the way. He was the one to take a nap after eating rotten fruit during the race and had stomach cramps. One of the racers collapsed and coughed up blood due to dehydration and had to have surgery for a dust-lined esophagus. Fourth-place finisher got chased off course by a dog. The whole thing was an absolute disaster. Similarly, the 1912 Olympic Marathon in Stockholm. Not quite as much of a disaster, but still a funny story. Japan sent their first marathoner that year, Shizo Kanekuri. Dude was pretty good too. In qualifications, he reportedly broke the world record for the marathon. Unfortunately, travel from Japan to Sweden in 1912 was a bit more time-consuming than today. 18 days by ship than the entire span of the Trans-Siberian Railway. Rough travel, the long days in Stockholm, and the unfamiliar food didn't sit right with him. To make matters worse, his coach contracted tuberculosis, and he wasn't able to train for the race. So when race day came along, he pulled out midway through and was cared for by a local family. Embarrassed, He went home to Japan without notifying race officials. While Kanikuri was a bit of a celebrity in Japan, he became somewhat of an urban legend in Sweden due to his disappearance. In 1967, Swedish television tracked him down and offered him the opportunity to finish the race, which he accepted. And so Kanikuri placed 36th in the 1912 Olympic Marathon in Stockholm with a time of 54 years, 8 months, 6 days, 5 hours, 32 minutes, and 20.3 seconds, thus ending the entire schedule of the 1912 Olympics. It was a long trip. Along the way, I got married, had 6 children and 10 grandchildren. Event 4. During the Napoleonic Wars, a French ship sank off the coast of Hartlepool, England. The only survivor was the captain's pet monkey, which he always dressed in a French military uniform. The locals freaked out because the law was that any French military found on British soil must be executed as a spy. So they ordered the standard punishment spies, death by hanging. Except instead of dying, the monkey just kept climbing up the rope, because it was a monkey. Hartlepool has since embraced their failure at executing a tiny primate for military espionage. Their local football team is nicknamed the Monkey Hangers. Event 5. Potatoes were not very popular as a food in France, like they were seen as fit only for animals. A pharmacist named Parmentier knew they were good food and wanted to popularize them among the working class. He got a 2-acre farm to grow potatoes and placed armed guards around it. People assumed armed guards meant something very valuable was growing there, so they began to steal the potatoes. That's how potatoes became popular in France's working class. Event 6. President Jimmy Carter was attacked by a rabbit while paddling around in a rowboat. The president was minding his own business rowing around a small pond and fishing when a rabbit left the shore and swam deliberately towards the boat, apparently crazed. Carter splashed the rabbit with water, driving it away from the boat, according to Press Secretary Jody Powell. Upon closer inspection, the animal turned out to be a rabbit. Not one of your cutesy, Easter Bunny-type rabbits, but one of those big splay-footed things that we called swamp rabbits when I was growing up. The animal was clearly in distress, or perhaps berserk. The president confessed to having had limited experience with enraged rabbits. He was unable to reach a definite conclusion about its state of mind. What was obvious, however, was that this large wet animal, making strange hissing noises and gnashing its teeth, was intent upon climbing into the presidential boat. Staff back on shore initially didn't believe the president's account, but a photographer managed to capture the moment. Carter's political enemies used the incident as fodder to show that he was weak and claimed that his response to the rabbit attack incited the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan that same year. Event 7. When the Spanish conquistadors, led by Hernan Cortés, were laying siege on the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs were holding out a lot longer than expected. Apparently, the city being built on a lake, among the complex canal system, and out of almost entirely fireproof materials, was something of an advantage to them. One day, one of the conquistadors with Cortés says, "Hey Morons, guess what? I know how to build a trebuchet. Let's build one and show these indigenous bumholes what's what." I may be paraphrasing here, but that was the general sentiment recorded by Bernal Diaz, who was present at the time, in his record of events, The Conquest of New Spain. The Aztecs also recorded the incident on their side. They watched from across the lake as a large piece of complicated-looking machinery was constructed from wood on the shore. They weren't sure what they were looking at, but knew it probably wasn't good news for them. They'd watched, nervous but compelled by curiosity, as the payload consisting of a single large boulder was heaved into place on the strange device. Then the wooden construction began to turn slowly, taking aim, and suddenly the counterweight is let loose, swinging heavily, heaving the boulder into the air, landing a few dozen yards away in the lake. The Aztecs continue to watch from afar. Looks like the Spanish are kind of yelling at each other about something. Lots of pointing, lots of raised voices. Guess that wasn't exactly the effect they were going for. On the Spanish side, it's finally agreed that trebuchet payloads were like pancakes. First one is always kind of a dud. We all know that. The Spanish commenced to reload the trebuchet. Now that the Aztecs know what it's supposed to do, kind of, they clear everyone out of the line of a fire. They have plenty of time because it's not exactly a speedy process to load it up. The Spanish release another boulder payload. This one manages to knock a hole in the wall of the now totally empty marketplace. Annoying, but not exactly devastating. The Aztecs watch as the Spanish argue some more, and then finally wheel the trebuchet away in shame. It is never seen again. Event 8. During most of the Roman Republic and Empire, generals would keep several sacred chickens to consult whether to go to battle or not. They'd throw seed in front of the chickens. If they ate, it was battle. If they didn't eat, they'd abstain. During the First War with the Carthaginians, Publius Claudius Pulcher, a senator and naval commander known for his Larry David-like antics, went to consult the sacred chickens on whether they should attack the Carthaginian fleet. When Pulcher saw that they were not eating, he exclaimed, "Since they do not want to eat, let them drink," and had them thrown them into the sea. The naval battle was a catastrophe, with most of the Roman fleet obliterated, and Pulcher was exiled. Always abide the sacred chickens. Event 9. The King of France annulled his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine because she failed to give him a male heir. The official reason given was consanguinity. They were too closely related. She promptly married Henry, Duke of Normandy, future King of England, 8 weeks after the annulment. Over the following 13 years, they had 8 children together, including 5 boys. The King of France, meanwhile, only had 1 son by his 3rd marriage. I will never not find it funny that she popped out 5 boys to her new husband straight after her being cast aside for being unable to have a boy. Event 10. The experimental bat bomb of World War II comes to mind. Briefly, it was a canister-bomb filled with hundreds of bats carrying small-timed incendiary devices. The bomb was to be dropped over Japanese cities at night. A parachute would deploy and the bomb would release the bats. At sunrise, the bats would seek shelter, lodging in the eaves of wooden structures. The resulting widespread fires would cause havoc and destruction. The bat bomb was developed and tested, at a cost of $2 million, but was never actually used against Japan. I think it was a pretty funny idea. Event 11. On October 30, 1978, a radio station in Cincinnati attempted a promotional giveaway for Thanksgiving by dropping live turkeys from a helicopter over a mall. The station manager was later quoted as saying, "As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly." The news reporter from the station, on the ground to cover the event, stated live on air that they were dropping like sacks of wet cement. The attempt to cut off his report, as it grew more tragic and disturbing, was ineffective as the DJ from the station, doing back and forth with the newsman, concluded the segment by saying the mall has just been bombed with live turkeys. Event 12. In the 1950s, 2 guys ended up controlling 98% of the onion market in the U.S., which was done by convincing the farmers that grew them to sell to them otherwise, they would flood the market with onions. A little bit later, they flooded the market with onions to the point where a 50-pound bag of onions went for 10 cents, which was less than the bag containing them. These guys ended up making millions off of this, and because of them, trading onion futures in the U.S. is now banned. Event 13. When the Gulf War broke out, the Iraqis just rounded up the men and put them in the military. There was an American who I believe was born in Iraq who had gone to visit his mother just before the war started. He was among those rounded up and put in the army. I would suspect he didn't want to say, "But I'm American," for his own safety. He wasn't even issued a uniform. His unit was captured fairly quickly, but when they were all standing there surrounded by the American soldiers, this dude in a Chicago Cubs t-shirt stepped forward, and in English, with no Iraqi accent whatsoever, said, "What the hell took you guys so long?" Event 14. In British India, there was a little problem with cobras. The obvious solution was to put a bounty on them. The only problem was that the price for each cobra the British were offering was greater than the cost of breeding and raising a cobra. The result was people breeding tons of snakes to claim the bounty. When the government realized what was happening, they scrapped the whole program. People raising the now worthless cobras set them loose. The end result was a big cobra problem. Event 15. The Whiskey War will never not make me smile. Hans Island is a tiny rock between Canada and Greenland. When I say tiny, I mean like half square miles. The Danes and Canadians both laid claim to the island because of a weird loophole in a treaty sometime in the 70s. But seeing as how it is literally just a rock sticking up out of the ocean, neither really cared. The militaries of the countries took turns showing up, planting a flag and a funny note, and leaving their enemies a bottle of liquor, usually Canadian whiskey or Danish schnapps. They even took out Google ads good-naturedly claiming the island and poking fun at their enemy. In 2022, they signed a treaty splitting the island between each other, thus technically making the 2 countries land neighbors. Event 16. During the Mexican-American War, there was one particular battle where both sides had cannons and gunpowder, but due to a logistical mess-up, only one cannonball between them. So they spent the entire battle firing the same cannonball back and forth at each other. It was the Battle of Rio San Gabriel. Event 17. Dwight D. Eisenhower's wife, Mary, was known as Mamie, a nickname that she's acquired when younger. She was called this by everyone she met and insisted on it. Well, not with everyone. The Eisenhowers loathed Senator McCarthy and his famous witch hunts. So this led to a situation when McCarthy was presented to the First Lady at the White House and referred to her as Mamie, to which she replied, "Senator McCarthy, my maid calls me Mamie. The cop in the street calls me Mamie, as does the garbage man. You will call me Mrs. Eisenhower." Event 18. The small German town of Rothenburg has wheels heavily featured on its coat of arms. In the 17th century, it was under attack and faced almost certain destruction. Before the invading army decimated the town, the general took a tour through their famously beautiful cathedral. The main hall of this cathedral was covered in the town coat of arms. The general looked around and said something to the effect of, "I wish I could take the cathedral back home with me." And without missing a beat, the priest said, "You can, it has wheels." The general laughed so hard at that dad joke he spared the town. And you just know the priest was absolutely insufferable after that. Event 19. In 1982, cartoonist Curio drew a cartoon of a caveman giving a classroom lecture, pointing to the spikes of a Stegosaurus dinosaur tail and calling that the Thagomizer after the late Thag Simmons. That particular arrangement of tail spikes had no name at the time, so scientists who were fans of Larson unofficially named it the Thagomizer. Event 20. When potatoes first arrived in Russia and Peter first ordered people to grow them and eat them, they ended up eating the flowers and many people died because of food poisoning. They began anti-potato protests, which really confused the government. After a while, Peter first realized what the problem was and then had to send people with instructions on how to eat potatoes. That's a wrap for this video. Make sure to leave your relatable story down in the comments. I would love to make a video on them. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.